All right, how's everyone doing? I am Rich CELENZA. Thanks for tuning into the Rich CELENZA Show. WTF are you talking about? So, what I want to call today's podcast is, at least I think, is learn how to give your friends space. So, what I'm going to get into today is a lot about friendships and what I've learned over the years. And the one thing I learned more than anything regarding friendships is I believe the more space you give your friends and the more open minded you are toward what they're doing, the better off you're going to be. And I learned this actually at a very young age. If you know anything about me, I grew up in Chicago, and then my father owned a nightclub outside there, and my parents got divorced at a young age. So I used to kind of bounce between two of them, and I learned to make friends in both areas. And then my father moved to Florida when I was, I think, 14 or 13, and I would spend my summers in Florida, and then I'd live in Chicago during the school year. So I would make friends in Florida and then in Chicago as well. So I learned to have, obviously, back then we didn't have the internet and all the other bullshit. So the only time I would really see my friends in Florida is when I was in Florida, and the times I was in Chicago, I'd always be with my friends in Chicago. I mean, we may talk on the phone like once or twice a year if you're lucky, my Florida friends. But then I eventually moved to Florida permanently, and to a certain degree, I felt like I was kind of leaving my friends behind. Like, I can't believe I grew up with all my friends my whole life, and now I'm just moving to another state. I was actually heartbroken. I remember going into a room and crying because I was leaving. But a lot of my friends went on to go to college, in which I was going to go to Florida and go to a junior college, but all my friends, a lot of them were the very educated guys. A lot were lawyers, accountants. They went on to own their own law firms. So they all went to college, except for one of my other closest friends. He went in to get a union job. But nonetheless, I moved to Florida. And then as time went on, I started to travel when I was younger too. So I started making friends in different states and cities. And I have a monstrous family. So that goes for having family in the West Coast, the Midwest, mainly in the South as well. Really no one in the East Coast. But I was able to make friends kind of everywhere, and I love meeting new people and kind of being open-minded. I didn't give a shit if you were straight, gay. I just didn't really care. That doesn't necessarily mean I was hanging out with all different types of people continuously, or they were my closest friends. I stuck with my closest friends because I grew up with them. That's kind of how I felt. And then I was one of the first guys, too, to get married very young, I guess you could say. I'm not very young, but was I 24 or 5? I don't know. In that range, 25, I think. But I was one of the first ones to get married. So then you start the couples thing where you start hanging out with other couples. And if your friends got girlfriends, you'd hang out with them as well. But if they broke up, then, that was different, because then your wife, or my ex-wife at the time, would be friends with that girl. And then it would end that relationship. And you're kind of like, oh, shit, now they're dating someone else. It gets a little confusing. But here's what I'm trying to get at as far as friendships goes that I realized worked with me, and the last 10 years especially, traveling a lot. And that is, when you have great friends and good friends and best friends, the one thing you have to realize is at times they're going to be in your life a lot of times, and other times they may not. You may communicate differently as well. Meaning sometimes, and this goes for me as well, and I think sometimes I'm, me living in other states where actually most of my closest friends are still in Chicago, but I do have a lot of really close friends in Florida. But at times, I will see them for, multiple times, let's say in 1 year or in a month, and then maybe the next few months or the next year, I very seldom see them. And I think I have an openness, and I think a lot of my friends have that as well, to know no matter where I go or no matter what I do, I'm always there for them, and vice versa. But I see a lot of people with friends that if they're not always in contact with them, or always kind of, I guess you could say, in their life to a certain degree, they get aggravated at that person because they're not there. And I'm telling you to just let that shit go. Just because your friends may, or at one time in their, or just throughout your life may want to break from the relationship. And I don't mean a break like saying I don't want to be with you anymore, but just needs a break from whatever they're doing in their life. And that does not make them an enemy. Just because maybe they don't, like they can't make it for dinner numerous times, or they're just doing something else in their life that's a priority and you're not as much of a priority, let it go. You never know what somebody else is going through. I talk about that a lot of times, and that is, we don't live anybody else's life. So if you go into their life, your friend's life, you don't know if there's sickness in the family. You don't know what they're personally going through, even regarding their relationships. They may be having a hard time with, their wife or their husband or whoever they're with. They may be having issues with their kids. They may be having a problem with their job, or their, whoever they're with may be having financial problems. And you got to sometimes realize when people want to, kind of just not communicate sometimes, or be left alone for, long periods of time, that can be a good thing. You being a pain in their ass and always bothering them can actually go against you. It can really go against you. And I get a lot of times we want to be there too for our friends and say, hey, listen, I realized, you've been distant from me and blah, blah, blah. I'm here for you. I want to help you no matter what it is. Well, sometimes they don't want your help, or they may be embarrassed, or they're not interested necessarily in like going through it with you. And that can even be your closest friends or your best friend sometimes, I think, or someone you spend a lot of time with. Again, it's them. It's what they're going through personally. And I think people just need to learn to give other people space, and that really goes for family as well. And this can go for, I've seen this happen with my cousins, my aunts, my uncles. I've even seen grandparents go through it where they're just tired. And they're maybe just, they just need time alone. And me being an only child, I think I can really relate to that, where a lot of other people can't. Is I can kind of get divide, me personally, when my friends, let me get some water here, want to be bothered doing certain things, and when they don't. Me flying in and out of town a lot of times, especially Florida to Chicago, a lot of my friends now have kids that are in sports, or they have kids that are just busy doing different things, or they're just busy with other couples, whatever the case may be. Events, and these are my closest friends, but if I come to town, I always let them know I'm there. I don't always see them. And actually, that's a good thing, I think, because I know they're busy living healthy lives. A lot of times you're like, oh my God, you're stiffing me, I'm stiffing you, like as a joke. But even though I do live in another state, they know that, I'd love to see them, but if they're too busy, or a lot of times I go to Chicago and I'm like, I'm sorry, I have a wedding to go to, and then I have to go to this family party, or I have to go do this with my girlfriend, or my kids are in town, they want to do this, and it doesn't mesh. That doesn't mean I don't love them, and it doesn't mean that, anyone should be mad at each other because they're not taking time out for one another. Things just happen like that, especially nowadays, more than ever. We're busier than ever. But I do see a lot of friends, actually sometimes even mine, get mad at me and say, you're an asshole, you should have did this, or why didn't you do that, you should be, And I'm like, dude, I'm doing the best I can. It's not that I'm intentionally stiffing you. And when it comes to friends or family members, like I was saying, a lot of times, again, no one, I think for the most part, wants to ever hurt their friend or make them, put them in a bad position where they feel like they're being neglected, or they're being ghosted, or they're being, ghosted is kind of more of a dating term, but it's very similar, like ignoring them. They're not doing that, I think, a lot of times. And you have to realize the way someone feels now, they may not feel like that 6 months, a year, 2 year, down the road. And also on a positive thing, I've realized a lot of my friends, I remember when they were going to law school especially, and I was making a movie, and they were in my movie. But I was almost so self-centered and selfish to say, hey, my movie is a priority over your law school. And then I had to sit back because I had to reschedule things constantly. I'm like, what kind of asshole am I? And that's something also I think a lot of people have to realize. If you're doing something and you want your friends involved, and it can be whatever, I don't even care if it's a party and they don't show or they can't make it, too bad, right? There's other things maybe in your friend's life that are more of a priority than what you're doing, and you have to accept that. Now, if they're intentionally blowing you off and they don't want you to be a part of their life anymore, right? Let it go. Give it time. Who knows why that is? Maybe it's, I obviously you want to work it out at the beginning, but sometimes friends or even family members, they just hit the wall and they don't want to have anything to do with you. Who knows why? But again, let it breathe. I think sometimes when you get away from somebody, it's very similar to like a relationship. When they're away from you, if they really want you to be back in their life, they're going to work it out, and vice versa. If not, you just have to learn to evolve and move on. You're going to have a lot of friends, I think, throughout your life. My mother has a theory, if you end up with one good friend, you ended up with like a diamond or a jewel. That's an incredible thing, which it is. I've been very fortunate. I have a lot of friends, very, very close friends. And I think one of the reasons I do have close friends is because I've always, regardless what they were going through on the ups and downs, they always knew I was there for them, even if I wasn't there. And I said that earlier, and vice versa. I've had my own, issues. I was like one of the first to get married, and then I was like one of the first, and this was still 15 years later, I was one of the first to get divorced. So I went through that phase, but I was with the same person for a long time. And the one thing I was going to say is when you have somebody you've been with for, say, 25 years, and then you're getting a divorce, and all your friends, which we used to goof around, all my friends knew my ex-wife like when they were teenagers all the way up until now they're 40 years old roughly, and now that person is leaving. And of course I'm not allowing anybody to take sides. I would never do that. But it did change the dynamic of some of my friendships with couples. And if you've ever been through a divorce or a breakup or whatever the case may be, and you've been with someone for a long time, you got to understand sometimes, and I understood this even though, whatever, some of your friends, even guy friends, now are, with their wives or girlfriends, and they miss that other person that left. And now you start dating other people that are new, and you may not jive as well. Also, your friends may not like that person as much, just saying hypothetically. But when you do get divorced, that I've seen a lot of times, the couple friendships, I call them, or your kids' school, their parents and all them, that relationship changes, and that's understandable. Don't get all pissy. I tell people, especially if you're getting divorced, for one, like I just said, telling people to pick sides and shit, or making things complicated because your ex, for instance, was a part of their life for a long time. That doesn't mean that your ex should not be a part of their life. And you, right? It goes both ways. That could be included like getting invited to parties or inviting them or just whatever the case may be. You've got to learn to be open-minded regarding that. I think a lot of times, because I think sometimes with our friends that can ruin relationships. That's just something to really think about regarding that. But please give your friends, I goof around too lately, so we're on String Tex, and one of our close friends owns an Italian restaurant, and when he first reopened it again, we were there all the time. We're back to like the old days, and as time went on, it didn't become as unique, and now it seems harder and harder to all of us to get together, this certain group of friends I hung with. And I goof around and say you're all lazy pieces of shit and blah, blah, blah. But I don't get upset at them, and they don't get upset at me, because we all know we live active lifestyles, especially two of us travel everywhere. And a couple of the other ones, they don't travel, but they're busy as well. A lot of them have those kids. They're in the teenager phase. So just, that's what the podcast is. Please be open-minded and stop and really don't judge your friends always in the moment. And also, if you get in a beef with your friends or family member, whoever, screaming, whatever, life goes on. That's one argument. Don't let an argument dictate the rest of your life or not be friends. And everyone, I think, has good days and bad days. I talk about it, good months, good years, bad years. And you got to understand, sometimes you're not getting along at this certain point in time, but that doesn't mean it's going to carry on forever. And it could even be something as stupid. You could be arguing over religion, politics, sports. You could be arguing over whatever the case may be, something you did, something you said, right? And that's, we're going to argue or you're going to have your issues, but you got to learn to eventually let that shit go. Is it really worth ruining your relationships? But also, if you get in those type of situations where somebody's very upset with you, again, no reason to keep pushing their buttons or no reason to maybe even keep apologizing, even if you, regardless if you thought it was your fault or not, like to get the friendship back, just sometimes let it breathe. Time will heal. I believe that. And you just got to understand it's not going to always work out the way you want, especially with friends. They're not going to maybe always do what you think is right. Again, we all live different lives, but I do see a lot of people constantly judging their friends on different things that may not, or they may not think that that's right or wrong. And the truth is that's their decision. If you don't like it, I get it, and if you really don't like it, then you may have to stay away from them. But the truth is, I think a lot of times, especially if you grew up with a lot of people, you just need to have the patience. And the one backbreaker, I think, regarding friends that I've seen is, or two, I should say, is business dealings and money. I would recommend trying to stay away from that, especially as I got older. I realized that more than anything, especially with family, is when money gets involved, money destroys more relationships, I'd say, than anything. Maybe social media, I don't know. But that is something to really try to avoid. And if, that goes for borrowing money, like I was saying earlier, going into business with your, close friends, maybe even working with close friends. Those are all things you've got to realize that if it ends, usually for the most part, it ends badly on one side or another. Not always, but if it does, it's usually rough and it ruins a lot of relationships. And I had a lot of people work for me and my father when I was younger. And my number one thing is, and this goes for relationships as well, I did not want them to end badly. Even if somebody did something very bad to me, I would call them out on it, but then I would still let them know, you know what I mean? I think what you did, you effed up, but you know what I mean? Well, eventually in the future, I'm sure we're going to be friends again, but right now, what you did was really uncalled for. Because I know when I was younger, I made mistakes, and I wanted to be forgiven as well. I am by no means perfect. I may have said something to offend somebody, did something, got in fights, all these different things that I regretted. And I think, again, when it comes to friendships, the more open we are and honest about it, no one is perfect. So anyways, I'm going to wrap it up there. If you get a chance, you might want to check out my YouTube videos. I've been posting a lot of stuff on there regarding fitness more than anything lately, but there's all different stuff on there. Some of my favorite restaurants all over North America, coffee houses, gyms. And I'm on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and what else? LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, I don't know. Whatever I'm on. Yeah, so that's it. If you're traveling, safe travels. Take care.